Hi, welcome to Think, Engage, Thrive. This is where we take an inside look at the roller coaster journey of entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Phil Masiello, and fellow entrepreneur. And each episode, we'll be interviewing a different founder to dive into the good, the bad, and the funny experiences of starting and growing a business. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, there's always something to learn from challenges, triumphs, and stories, those who have been there before. So sit back and get ready for some real talk and about what it takes to make it in the world of startups. We've got our first guest tonight is a young entrepreneur, Phil Dimuro, and he's a founder of Founders Approach, started in the business, and he's got a great story, somebody with a great insight into what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and again, the good, the bad, and the funny experiences. So, Phil, glad you're here. I love your energy. So again, why don't you give us a little bit of a background, give us a little bit about a history of what you are, how you got here, and what motivates you.
Yeah, Phil, it's great to be here. Thank you for including me in this. I feel as you introduced me as young, which feels great because I was even younger when you first met me a decade ago. So I feel like if I can keep that title as I keep moving up, that's a good sign. But yeah, I've been I like to say interested in entrepreneurship since I was a young kid. Very much so. I was got grounded. My first time I got grounded was trying to sell water door to door, thinking that was an okay thing to do for a young child. Promptly, I think my parents still realized that they could feed into that rather than punish me for it. So it was very much so the early years of just kind of getting started, very much so trying to find my way through entrepreneurship and clubs and organizations and things like that all the way through. And it's really been something that I feel like I felt it from an early age. And I think the more I've grown into the role, it feels more and more natural to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting point, and I hear that a lot, and I've experienced it myself. It was very difficult for me when I was young to get a job. You go to college and then you come out and you get a job, and you're thinking to yourself in the back of your head, there's something else I want to do. And I did it when I was 27. I started a business. That was my first business. It was a total and utter disaster. It was 3 years of pain and agony, and I'll talk about that in the future. But I learned a tremendous amount, and that's that led me, I think, down a better path. But I understand exactly what you're saying.
It's definitely always the dots that you can see when you look back, right? The famous Steve Jobs quote of always looking back, they make sense, but at the time, none of it makes sense. And I think I'm 32 and very much so at the point where we built multiple businesses, some successful, some not. But every single one was absolutely a stepping stone to learn about and get enough skills to take you to that next level. And I think that's that funny part that it just always makes me laugh is it doesn't make a lot of sense at the time. If anything, a lot of times people that are too rational, like don't get into entrepreneurship, because if you do get that first job out of college, if you do start down the corporate path, it's so easy to get very comfortable in that model. And I had that a little bit. I definitely went through my own sorts of career paths and in the corporate world. And after a couple of years, it just something didn't feel right. Something felt like I was missing something in my life. And I started working on ideas on the side. And that's what really got me to the point of feeling comfortable quitting.
Well, where'd you start? Where'd you start in that corporate world? You went to college and then...
Yeah, essentially. So I was graduating college back in 2012, right? So we're coming out of the great financial crisis. So the jobs aren't crazy, but through that period of time through college, I tried to sample as much as I could. I did a nonprofit that was in entrepreneurship for a foundation that felt really right. I worked for the government in the Navy, doing training and support, and then I did some restaurant work. I've always been in the restaurant industry ever since I was really young. My first jobs, and I got to experience some really incredible bosses during that time that were entrepreneur owners that kind of inspired me. So I always had a little bit of an itch for it, but getting up to 2012, getting to graduate, it was a tough job market. I had interviewed for probably 100, I'd applied for over 100 jobs, interviewed for 30, and just, towards the end of my college career was really searching. And a friend, I just happened to be in the room when a friend was mentioning to another friend, hey, my brother works at Boston Beer, Sam Adams. Like, do you want to, maybe you can work there this summer doing tours or something up in Boston. And I said to him, I was like, wait, can I, do they have jobs in other places? And sure enough, got the connection. They were looking for a full-time sales rep, and had a crazy interview process at the time. But my first job was I was a brewery representative for Boston Beer, and I
Wow,
got to learn a lot through that process.
that's great. And then the bug hit you.
Yeah,
Then you had the idea. The spark happened.
it's definitely a moment. I feel like there's the itching towards it, right? Where you just, something doesn't feel right, even if the idea is not totally there yet. And I felt that all the way through college, right? And there were a few things we did on the side that, looking back, are horrible ideas, very funny ones. And it got to the point that basically, with Sam Adams, it felt right enough that I made the jump. I wanted to learn while I was at the company. They invested heavily in like sales and entrepreneurship, like training, essentially, because my
Sure.
was half of Maryland was my territory, and I dealt with the thousands of business owners there. And I got an insight into all of their businesses during that time, and I got to see, hey, maybe I want to own a restaurant one day. And then I realized like how demanding that industry is. And maybe at least have to. And I got to the point really where I was itching for something on the side, and I had this idea where my wife and I my wife was in grad school at the time, and when she'd come home from work, she would say something like, it's been a crazy day. Where's like a wine special today? Where can we go out and get a nice bite to eat? Maybe we're post-college kids. Where's something that's less expensive? And I had been calling on these restaurants every day, looking at the chalkboards as I walked by, seeing all the specials. I just couldn't remember them at the end of the day when I got home. So I said, like, why is there not a centralized app for this kind of thing? And that was what started the idea of Loophole. And it got to the point that built it on the side for about a year. Had some moments that felt like it was okay, ready to go, and kind of made my plan.
Yeah. That's interesting. I grew up in the restaurant business. My family owned restaurants, and I thought that was my path. And I thought when I got out of school, but when I was in college and I was working in restaurants, I was like, no, I don't want to do this, man. These people are working until 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. But I knew I wanted to do something with food. And my first business was a food store. It was a retail store.
Mm-hmm.
And, but the mistakes I made were, I can't even go into. It was the things I did at the time, like you said a little while ago, you thought that they were the right thing to do at the time. But
Mm-hmm.
when you look back on them now, you want to smack yourself and go, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
But I mean, I can't complain. It was successful. I sold it for more money than I put into it. But I mean, it was 3 years of absolute pain and hell because I tried to do everything. I was not a good leader. I was not a good delegator.
Yeah.
I was not a good person building systems. I was spending way too much time working in the business, not enough time working on the business, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that, Phil. It's you see it frequently too. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that they have the idea, but they're not, they can execute the idea, but on a very small scale, right? Like if they need to start building a team, you're a different type of person is needed for that a lot of times. And I think that's where a lot of the companies too struggle is if you have the idea and you can at least get it going, we'll also recognize you need other people in that company, whether it be a co-founder or like a key hire in your early days, but you need that counterbalance you because every entrepreneur always thinks they have the best idea in the world.
Oh, yeah.
We're the best ideas. And that's very rarely true. It's very rarely that you have the best idea.
I know. It's true. You have to look at what's happening. You have to listen to what the people are telling you. You have to be able to take counsel. That's why those entrepreneurial forums are so good because, you can explain what's happening in your business to other entrepreneurs and they can sort of give you a little, dose of reality, so to speak. But, yeah, it's incredible what I did back then was, I look back on it now and I think, oh my God, what kind of person was I? But, you live and you learn because it definitely, as I moved on and I built other businesses, I always kept that in the back of my mind that I had to build the systems, it's funny because I work with, a lot of entrepreneurs and they get focused on this. I'm afraid to let other people know my business. I'm afraid to,
Yes.
I want them to sign an NDA. I want them to do this and that. And I always say the same thing. The idea is the easy part.
Yeah.
It's the execution of the idea that's the key. That's where that's what separates a good entrepreneur from not. Just having the idea and talking about it. 9 times out of 10, people don't hear it the same way as you're saying it.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think I'm a big believer too that the movie The Social Network, I feel like
Oh yeah.
took an entire generation of entrepreneurs that we see now that are like very scared of their idea, scared to talk to people, scared someone's going to steal it. They think they have the $1 billion idea that like somehow doesn't exist yet, when in
Right.
reality that's probably not the case. But the more earlier you start talking to people about it, and in safe ways, right? Like obviously we're talking about generalized ideas, mobile apps, websites. There's a lot of them that are, most of the time, the idea is you need to have a good idea and execute on it better than someone else, versus having some idea that you keep closed off from everyone else and try and file every patent in the world and
Oh,
hopefully that you can protect it. And that is not it's not a proven way of success, other than very specific niches like in biotech and
yeah.
engineering, very, very specialized fields.
Sure.
Well, you also said, Phil, so you were in your 20s too, and when you were doing your first companies, and that was what I was. I think that's what I like, is trying to inspire younger entrepreneurs to do it too, because I can see even my personal life, in my 30s, I have a different style of life that I did before, and I see it with my friends and that have wanted to quit their job for 5-6 years, right, 8-10 years at this point, but the idea is not ready yet, or they just feel like they're just not there, and it gets to a point a lot of times where, when you're young, you can live the bootstrap lifestyle. You can live the ramen diet. You can do that, which is what a lot of times you need to at least bootstrap the idea and get it up and running. Versus like if you're later on, a lot of times too, you can get trapped in whether it be the corporate hierarchy you're going into, or maybe it's just something that, it gets harder and harder to be willing to quit your job and take that jump. And I'll say for me, that was actually, despite the fact that I came from a very supportive family that was very entrepreneurial, very much so like supported me through a lot of these ways, I was very nervous that like one of the hardest decisions I had to make was, after I'd made it, was actually just going in and quitting my job. And looking back, I still, to this day, I'm like getting chills thinking about how nervous I was in the car, because like I loved my boss. I respected the team I was in, and I felt like this was going to be a little bit of a shock to them. But I also knew it was the thing that I needed to do. And it was so funny, because I think one of the things I faced as that was lucky was I, for some reason, decided to record a video in my car right before going in to quit. And I still have that video and I still cherish it today, because it was basically me saying in this camera, like, I don't know if this is going to work. I'm really not certain. Like, I'm jumping off of a proven path that's worked really well for me to take a risk. I don't know if this is a good idea. And it's funny because I look back and I can see all the emotions in that video, but I can also see like, yeah, but if you don't make that jump, you won't get the next steps from it. And sure enough, I went into that interview, and within a couple minutes of talking, I actually said, this is, I want to talk to you about something I'm thinking about, or I'm leaving my job. I'm working on this side idea. And I was so nervous because everyone's afraid. I think their boss is going to be upset with them. And my boss was like, hey, is this a dead set? Have you made this decision? And I was like, yes. And I'm really excited about it. And she said, perfect. Like, I know you, I've worked with you for 2.5 years. Like, you are very much so built for this kind of lifestyle. I'm excited. And then we spent the rest of the meeting kind of just brainstorming the idea. And she almost was helping me with it. And it was a weird feeling that I felt like 1,000 pounds were lifted off of me after that meeting. And since then kind of haven't looked back.
Yeah, it's amazing, the leap, right? It's almost like jumping off the cliff, because now and it gets harder and harder as you get older, because you get married, you start to have kids, and then you've got these responsibilities, and you think, how am I gonna pull this off? I missed my opportunity when I was young. I don't believe in that. I think there's always a way. You have to sit down with your partner and sort of figure out, especially if you really want to do it, because if not, you wind up with this regret. But totally. I mean, it's a really good story that your boss at the time sort of helped you walk through it and saw that you were good at it, which is, it's not something that happens every day, because there are a lot of bosses that go, oh, you're quitting, now I'm going to have to hire somebody, and now I have to do this, not thinking about you as the individual and what's right for you. So so you built Loople. Explain it. Tell me about it.
So the idea really came from working in restaurants, but really not being able to remember the specials afterwards. Find where live music was, find where a place that had a pool table if we wanted to play. So it was all the information that at the time wasn't on Google and wasn't on Yelp, and it was only on the individual websites for the business, or like when you actually show up to the restaurant, you'd see the special at that time, which is not the goal. The goal is to bring you in from the special. If I'm already there, you're kind of downselling someone to the special. So the idea for Loople was to aggregate thousands of this information into one area. We had launched in Baltimore at the time. We thought it was our city where we had been working in and knew very well. And it got to the point that we said, okay, we want to get this thing running. I knew that I was going to quit my job to do it. My one co-founder at the time wasn't totally sure about it. And we kind of had difficult conversations to negotiate some equity. And we were able to give that to another co-founder, Dave, who you know now, who came into the company. And he was willing to quit his job and take the leap with me. And we were kind of spearheading it. And the idea was really finding all this information, but from within a second from opening up the app. And very quickly, we had thousands of businesses on the platform. And we scaled it to, at the peak, we were having 10,000 monthly active users on the platform. But at the same time, there were a lot of struggles behind the scenes where we were thinking that users would keep this information up to date themselves, so we didn't have to manage it. And that wasn't totally true. And we thought, okay, we can scale it to Annapolis and these other markets pretty easily. And we realized, no, you really need people in each market. So a lot of the things I think that we as an entrepreneur in the very beginning, Dave and I were saying, oh, we'll scale our way out of this issue. We won't face this issue because we'll just scale past it. That was a complete lie. Like the things that I think made us fail were the same things we knew early on, but we just kind of thought they would get solved if we just got enough users, if we just got enough businesses on the platform. And I don't know, looking back, if that was the right thing, if that makes sense, but it gave me a ton of experience.
Yeah. I think, that's always sort of been the downfall because of those types of apps, because the restaurant, bar, club business is very fragmented, and those people focus on the owners, the managers, et cetera, focus on the here and now. Tonight we're doing this, tonight we're doing this. They don't think about, well, let me update the specials in this, this app. Let me do this. They're not built that way. And it's not something you can automate. We have that problem with another company that we work with that has this fragmented. It's in the recycling world, and they have these cooperatives that pull together all the recycled material, and then the website, the company's website, gives the ability to sell that recycled material. So they're actually doing a service for the cooperatives, but the cooperatives are so fragmented that they don't keep up the inventory. So nobody knows what's really out there. So now they're rethinking it as, sort of, we'll consolidate all this inventory and we'll take care of updating the inventory. But that's always been the problem. And, it's the same thing in your case, because that information from those clubs and bars is the inventory. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I also find it interesting because I think about when I was really early on in this and just learning about business. I don't think they taught you this in college or in school or anything, and I studied entrepreneurship in school. That's what I've been interested in. But in those classes, I don't think they really taught you that different businesses and different business models have different levels of successes, right? Everyone says, okay, well, your chance of failure is X, right? When in reality, that's not necessarily true, the type of business, right? Where we were like a platform. So we needed to grow users at the same time we were growing businesses. Yeah. And then at the same time, we needed to grow advertisers. So we had to keep 3 balls juggling at the same time, which is really difficult to do until you get millions of users, right? So if I would have thought about that earlier on, I would have realized, well, we need a larger run rate. We need to be able to run this company for X amount of years, and we need a marketing budget because the users need to build up to this. And we kind of grew month on month, and we were growing at nice speeds, but it was not enough to kind of escape that escape velocity you need for a company to really get it to keep growing like crazy. And it was very interesting versus, when we kind of made our pivot and we switched into other business models, right? I started realizing, wow, there's business models where you get paid up front. There's different businesses too that are just easier. You can sell one unit of it at a time, and you're actually purchasing it rather than being like an ad supported platform. So I thought that was kind of one of those eye-opening moments for me.
Yeah, I want to get to that. That's an important point, and that's one of the reasons I wanted you on the show, was exactly what you just said about the pivot. But before we go there, we have to take a minute, because we do have a sponsor for the show, and I had them send you some product. And it's for those of you out there who are hot sauce fans, Dave's is the sponsor of the show, and they produce hot sauce. Dave's one of they started the super hot category about 30 years ago, and it's great product. I had sent you some. You got any thoughts on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when Phil said hot sauce fans out there, I immediately raised my hand because my wife and I easily have 5 different types in our fridge kind of at all different times, right? But a lot of them are more the traditional. It was very much so like the sriracha, the crystal, right? Yeah. The more base level that are good for base level pieces. But this was one of the more interesting ones where You gave me the creamy ones, which I got to
Yeah.
try, and I never had a creamy hot sauce before, which was a very unique flavor. And then also the habanero and Scotch bonnet one. So those are much more have the kick to them, the flavor. And we've made a few items with them, different things though for each one, because I feel like that's what you need. The hot sauce needs to definitely match the food really well for it to get the flavor.
Yeah, it's interesting, the creamy hot sauces, right? Which I really like because they have multiple uses. There's the traditional hot sauces, right? Which are more flavor enhancers, I think, right? You put them in sauce, or you
Totally.
add them to your food or whatever, and it gives you that little kick. But the creamies in and of themselves, they could be dips, they could be spreads, they could be, sauces. They can do a whole bunch of things. They've got a little bit of heat and a lot of flavor. And some of the hot sauces I think have a lot of heat and a little bit of flavor, and I'm sort of in that middle balance. I like heat, but I like flavor as well. So
that's exactly, I think, where I am with a lot of it, where I'm a big fan of it needs to have a balanced amount to it. And I thought it was interesting, right? So some of the things that we did, my wife and I, as many people, I feel like in America, the last couple years have gotten in the air frying craze. So one of the first things we decided is we tried the creamy garlic red sauce, and that one we threw on. We did air fried wings, and we threw them on the wings because it's coats. It's thicker, right? So it sat on it, which was really good. And then versus the ones that were much more the habanero, the Scotch bonnet, those we always throw into like soup sauces or Asian meals. Like that's where very much so we decided to go with it. So I'm excited to have these as an addition in the fridge.
Yeah, they're a good company. I've been a fan of their products for a long time. So getting back now, the pivot, because I think that's an important concept, because a lot of people, and I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I mentor a lot of entrepreneurs, as you know, and I think they all believe that I built this plan and everything is going to go according to plan. And I don't think I've ever seen a startup go according to plan. None of mine went according to plan. I can tell you that. And so, the pivot, how did you know? What did you think? What was the kicker?
Well, so for us, I think this was one of the true benefits I had with having a co-founder who was fully in the company with me at the time, right? I very much so find that a lot of times entrepreneurs, it's really good to have a balance, right? Don't let that be something that stops you from getting into it, right? If you can't find someone, but if you have people, like, don't over engineer thinking through the equity stuff. Like there's ways to protect both of yourselves in it. But if you find someone who you think is willing to commit the same energy and the same effort and resources to the company, really like that's a value add that I think a lot of people have. And a good example of this is my co-founder and I would always ebb and flow. One of us would be, everything is great. This is the perfect idea. We're going to make that next round. That investor is going to close. We're set. At the same time, the other person's like, do you realize that like three businesses emailed in that they don't want to be on the platform anymore? And then you realize we got a 1-star review last week. So we'd constantly be balancing each other out. And I think very much so for me, we had been, we had gone through that startup trajectory. We had built it on the side while we were working full time. We quit our jobs. We launched it. We had 5,000 users in the first 2 months on the platform. But at the same time, we weren't getting the users back. Like there were a couple hundred on the app every single day. So we couldn't figure out what was going on. And we had to really talk with the users, identify what was going on. And that ultimately led us to identifying some things in the user interface that we could change around to make the app way more engaging. And what that was taking out a bunch of features that we had already built inside the app. So it was a bunch of money and energy that we had spent on this, thinking people would use this. And reality, no one was actually using it. And we had to be confident, okay, if no one's using this, stop forcing this on a market, take the feature out. And just by simplifying the app, overnight, our user base doubled. It was our daily active users started coming back. So we had that interesting trajectory, got into an accelerator program, which was a whole experience. And we really scaled it up nicely over that period of time. But we were a year and a half in at this point. We had raised friends and family. We had raised the accelerator round, but we were struggling for that first official seed round. And rightfully so. We hadn't solved a lot of the problems that investors knew we were facing, which is how to make money on this idea long term. We had sold about 30 grand worth of revenue through the platform, but at a year and a half to 2 years in, that's not enough to sustain my co-founder and I, who were digging into our 401ks, doing things that we knew weren't long-term solutions. So we knew there's a runway that's running out, and we had to kind of figure it out. And my co-founder, the pivot moment of knowing it was my co-founder And I had a really difficult long weekend of just constant no's, and you're always going to get that. But when the yeses come fewer and farther in between than they used to, something doesn't feel right. And I was the ever optimist trying to convince him, no, we're going to figure this out. We're going to scale our way out of this problem. It's going to be great. And we left, and it was kind of awkward, the last night. And I woke up the next morning, I had an email at like 4 a.m. and it was, thoughts because I can't go to sleep right now. And it was my co-founder giving me kind of like a manifesto of, man, like, I know you think you can prove this, but why? Like, where's the evidence? Show me why you think this other than faith. And it was that eye-opening moment where I was like, what am I, he said, what are we going to do? Is this going to be another year? And if it is, okay, what are we committing to the company? And it got to the point that it opened my eyes to say, like, we are both running out of runway. We're running out of revenue. We're not getting the closes we need to. And on the flip side, we had a potential investor on the line for a while. And ultimately, after 4 months, he gave us a verbal commit in very quickly that he would give us $250,000 for equity in the company. And in 4 months after that, we still could not convince him to sign the papers, even after all of this. So it got to the point that he was saying, actually, guys, I'm not going to invest in you, but I want to hire you to come build an app for me. You guys are going to move up to Philadelphia from Baltimore. I'll hire you. You'll run the company, because he was an older gentleman, very successful in his life, but didn't have the same energy he wanted to do it. And he was in his retirement. He said, I'll hire these young kids to do it. And Dave and I said, like, no, we're not going to take that offer. We don't want a boss right now. But, Dave and I said, well, why don't we just offer him to let him pay us to build the app for him? And we could take our team, who was still working on our idea at that time, and we could do part-time on our idea, part-time on his idea, and it would self-fund the company. And it was funny. It was like night and day. After 4 months of trying to get this guy to sign this paper, and commit the funds, all of a sudden we pitched him a consulting deal for, hey, it'll cost you this much this month and this much next month. And he said, sounds great. Where do I send the wire? And I was like, I did not think I was going to get that question real quick. Let me get back to you. And Dave and I literally took all the experience from the first company and said, okay, well, like, this is a separate entity. Let's spin up a separate company, right? So we knew how to do that. That took us months previously for our first company. Now it took us a long week, right? And we set up the company, and within a week we had received a wire for more money than we had made basically in the whole previous time. So Dave and I used that to kind of self-fund the idea, and that was what kickstarted Founders Approach, which is software development for hire. We had learned the skill doing our first business, and we figured, this was the best way to keep us working in entrepreneurship as long as we could. And that idea kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting, because, a lot of times I think when things don't go well, when entrepreneurs are starting their businesses and things don't go well, they miss the pivot, or they don't understand the pivot, or they don't see the pivot, because they're so focused and so set in their ways. Like you,
Totally.
they believe, I can scale my way out of this. I can work harder. I can get people to do things, when maybe there's an answer that's sitting, right in front of them. And
Yeah.
and I've been there as well. I mean, I started a food store chain down in DC, and many years ago. And the first store, I had an idea on how I wanted it to be, and I actually got the idea. It was like a brainstorm. I was in England, and I saw these Marks and Spencer Metro stores, which are small grab and go meal stores, and we didn't have anything like that at the time in the United States. And I had a big background in food, and I was like, you don't need, it dawned on me as I walked around, you don't need production. I don't need 1 million people sitting in the back of a store where I'm paying extremely high rents to be in these great locations to make all this food. I can partner with people to bring it all in.
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of the driving force. I got a location. I actually bought an existing company, and we supplanted the concept on there. But it didn't go particularly well, right? People still wanted a certain amount of service, but when we still took the production out. But after about 6 months, I realized where the benefit was, and the benefit was really just taking the production out. You can still offer, customization, not everything prepackaged, not everything just grab and go. You can offer customization, but you just took that whole back end labor out.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of an eye-opening experience, and that allowed us to open up a bunch of stores in DC. But
Do you feel, I'd be curious to know, do you feel like I feel like I talked to a good bit on entrepreneurs and it's kind of almost 50-50. Some think that it's like the aha moment, they have it and it just clicked for them. And some feel almost like it's you built to this idea until almost it's in your mind without you ever thinking you thought of it or something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way, but yeah. I mean, I think for me, there's always, when I start something, when we first get going, there's always that problem in my head that I can see the next problem and something's not right and something's not going right. And then I'll make a change. And then all of a sudden it becomes, there
This,
it was, that was the problem,
yep.
So.
I totally agree with that. I think also too, a lot of times with younger entrepreneurs getting into the space too, I hear this a lot where people, you don't celebrate your wins enough too, because when you're a small company, like there's always stuff going wrong. It'll never be perfect. Right. But if you don't ever celebrate your wins, like the small ones, I forget where I heard it, but someone, or maybe a YouTube video, something early on when we were getting started with Loophole and we were talking about how we had gotten, our first 1,000 users on the platform. Someone said how a lot of times when you're building, for us, it was digital. We didn't see these people, right? We'd see them occasionally when we were out in the field, but it didn't, those numbers didn't mean anything tangible to us. And I heard someone say, like, now imagine 1,000 people are standing outside your house right now. And that like visualized for me, wow, this is actually, I'm impacting a lot of people. And that feeling is almost very addicting in a sense. And I'm seeing with my wife now, who's starting up a small business, upcycling a bunch of items online that she's finding. And what she says, she's nervous to celebrate the wins. If she got like 10 orders in a weekend, right? Like, oh, cool, I can always have more. But in reality, like, think like that's 10 people that bought something that only they did because you were there for it. And I think that's when it starts building on itself and gets more and more exciting as it goes.
Yeah, I think, I have an agency now. And so we help e-commerce companies and we do branding and we do advertising, et cetera. But one of the things that we've learned to do and we preach to, our clients is, and this goes along with what you were just saying, picture 1,000 people outside of your house. You can talk about demographics and psychographics and all this stuff, but until you build a brand persona of who you're talking to, and give them a name and put them in your office, male and a female, give them a name, build around them what they like, what they don't like. Now you know who you're talking to. And I actually got that from years ago. We had a skincare line and we were on Home Shopping Network. And the CEO of the company, Mindy Grossman, she always used to refer to her when she talked. She'd say, she doesn't like this and she doesn't like that. And you would say, who? And she was like, our customer, because we know who our customer is. And she could rattle off exactly who the customer is. And she always referred to her as, as she, like that. And she explained the whole concept of the brand persona. And so she understood who she was talking to at all times. And, it permeated through the organization. And I think that's important. Because if you're just talking to air and you're talking to digital air, it doesn't work as well.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah. So you built Founders Approach. You're still rolling. So what is it you're doing? Like, how to explain to me that business? Because now you've pivoted from Loophole.
Yeah. So, and it's crazy to think about because this was, we quit our jobs back in 2015 would have been when we launched. So we launched our company in Loophole in 2015. We launched Founders Approach by 2017, right? So we had those first 2 years. So then since then, right, essentially we've been building a services business, right? So mobile apps, software products for clients, small to mid-sized businesses, basically anyone from a founder with a brand new idea, right? Which we had that intimate experience with ourselves, up to a $10-20 million business, right? Who is looking for a piece of software to solve an issue that they're facing. But in reality, the softwares that exist on the market aren't solving that problem for them, right? They might need a CRM, but they're in a very niche industry that there's not a CRM with the custom features that they need for their business. That's why they can't just go use a HubSpot or a Salesforce. And what we learned, right, a lot of times is technology, you're building something to solve a problem at the end of the day. So you want to identify that problem and know that problem, really deeply in the earliest stages as you're getting built. So a lot of times the founder or the C-level executive, someone in the team comes to us, and essentially, our team has steadily grown throughout the years. What we realized, right, is our business niche is basically we are localized project managers in the United States, and then we have overseas developer talent. So what we try and do is our price point, we can come in right in the middle, right? We're nowhere near as inexpensive as trying to outsource yourself, but we de-risk it a lot, right? There's a scenario where a lot of horror stories come from trying to do it yourself overseas and managing the cultural differences and the time differences. Then on the flip side, you can go and pay domestic developer talent, which is incredible. And I think there's really good value there, but it's very, very expensive nowadays. So only really, really well-established companies can even come close to affording some of this retainer work they might need. So that's where we kind of come in into the market. And I think Dave and I, it was very evident early on, we had something that was working, right? We could tell because cash was coming in from clients. We had interest coming in. What we had to do, though, was really learn the business in those first 3 years. So those first 3 years of us were very much so, do our existing systems that we have from Loople work for this new business, or is there something we need to be doing differently? So for the first couple weeks, I basically took all the time off I needed, and I just binged online content and coursework and things like that were free online to really understand the technology piece of it that at that point I knew enough of, but I didn't know enough to be dangerous in. So I kind of, we sat as a team between my co-founder and I, figured out what we needed to do, figured out the roles we were going to take. And the first 3 years really felt like it was building. We were making huge incremental changes. Every change you make is like a 10% improvement on the company, right? Everything feels, crazy. And it's funny, the last 3 years has been very stable, right? As the company is almost more at maturity now, where we have much more of a flexibility to it, right? I think my co-founder and I are at a different stage in life too. So we like the balance that we get from our job. It's still crazy to me that it's been 8 years since I've had a paycheck, an official paycheck from a company that we didn't get from actions we took. So it's been really exciting. And I'm proud that my co-founder and I, through all of it, just continually figured out ways to work together to make it work. And our team's now about 15 people big, which is exciting. It's grown from just 2 of us in the early days. And it's continually scaled up from that. But now we're at a point where I think we're going to stay here for a little bit. I feel very comfortable with what the value we're providing, where our price point is. And I think right now it feels like a good balance of what we have.
Yeah, I think that's, that's an important point, because it's, you started out with an idea for Loople, you pivoted into this other business, but which was sort of like Loople, but not exactly, and some components, and then you had to learn it, but you learned it pretty quickly, and then you had to build on it, because it wasn't your background, and it also wasn't your first idea and first
exactly.
concept.
It was like you learn the skills from the one business, and even though the concept is different and the type of the business model is different and all those other pieces are different, you have some of those skills that can be brought in. I heard that early on in my life was one of the things no one can ever take from you is your skills, right? You cannot get that. Your boss can fire you from the job. You can lose the job, but if you have skills that are marketable, even in a global market nowadays, you can move the country, right? You can travel, you can do things differently. And to me, that's what I think I've been always focused on, right? Is my wife, right, is at a point in her career when she was working in a job that she really wasn't enjoying. And we could see that she was not enjoying life, and it was not fulfilling her by any means. And I just said, one day, Katie, do you have anything left to learn in this job, right? Is there anything left that you want? And she's like, no. And I was like, well, do you see yourself as your boss's position? Like if you were going to climb that ladder? And she was like, hell no, I don't want that position. I was like, so then why are you still there? Right? Like those are the two things that I think you should be thinking about. And that's if you want to grow through that kind of life cycle. But I think a lot of people in entrepreneurship have that kind of itch.
Yeah. I think that, for us, I started Crunch Growth back, God, I can't remember, 2016, I think, somewhere around there, but accidentally. It wasn't something I planned on doing, right? I had the razor business, we sold the razor business. I had the skincare business, we sold that. We sort of got into this based on requests, but our focus was on, strictly e-commerce and Amazon, helping people scale on Amazon on seller side, and helping people scale on their e-commerce platforms, and, doing, SEO and things like that, running ads, social media ads, etc. But that's not really what we're doing today at this point. So I've had to continually learn. And just like you, there's a lot of things we do that I didn't know, when we first started out. And we're more today, because of the demand of video, not just with social media video, but video ads on Amazon, video ads on any platform, social media platforms as ads, social running video as posts, just understanding how people are interacting with video, TikTok, etc. The role that plays. We've really had to restructure our employee base because now we have mostly people who are focused on understanding video, doing video, have a good social media background, have strong presence for themselves on TikTok and Reels and places like that, and that skill set is transferred onto better ads for the clients, even using it on their websites, even using it on their devices. I mean, it's really changed. We still do Amazon listings, we still do that type of work, we still do a lot of e-commerce work, but I was not a video person. I was not a visual video person, and now we've sort of had to do that. But yeah, it's interesting how we continue to evolve. But I enjoy learning new things every day. I mean, I honestly do. It amazes me. It's funny because there's a lot of people out there that don't understand like what's going on with TikTok or what's going on with Reels or what's going on social media, and they think it's for well, it's just for the kids, but in reality, it's not.
It's one of the things that I think attracts a lot of people to entrepreneurship is especially people that very much so have like ADHD or feel like they have feelings that they can't sit still. Like that was very much so my upbringing. And I think that's what feeds so well into it for me, because every day is absolutely different, right? And if it's not, I get bored with it, right? But I think the beautiful part, especially, I feel very privileged in the United States where the market is always moving, right? And if you're doing the same thing for 5 years, there's a chance that industry is dying out, that platform is dying out, right? So if you don't pay attention to the new platforms or the new social media apps or the new things that are coming about, you're not going to realize what the next demographic of users wants, because now we have the youngest generation that's literally growing up completely with technology.
Absolutely.
And they're ingrained in how they use it is very different. So I find it fascinating. That's what I love doing. Why I love doing this is it's exciting for me because of that.
Yeah, it's funny because you said, you can't sit still. Something's always working. It was, I wrote one book, and then on marketing, I wrote another one on Amazon, but I was somehow about, a couple of months ago, I read a story online about this pharaoh Tohotep back in ancient Egypt, and they consider him like one of the first entrepreneurs because he had these entrepreneurial spirit, and he figured out how to move goods and do trade with other people. I mean, at the time, the world was very small.
Yeah.
So he learned how to, farming methods and ways to improve. And I started thinking about it, and I started researching other entrepreneurs, right, in my spare time while I'm doing everything else I'm doing. And so I put together another book just on entrepreneurs, just on historical entrepreneurs, not the big ones that we all know.
Yeah.
Everybody knows, the Elon Musks of the world and, Steve Jobs and all that stuff, because we read about those stories still today. But there's guys out there that have done some really interesting things throughout history that you don't even think about because we didn't call it entrepreneurship then. Even Ben Franklin was a great entrepreneur. So I wrote another book. I don't know when it's coming out. I have to finish, putting it together. But I thought it was interesting for me, so I did it anyway. And I figure it's got to be interesting for some other people.
I completely agree with you. And I think that it's funny because entrepreneurship, I feel like I've gotten lucky in the sense that it's become like a cool thing to do when it wasn't very much so before, right? Like if you were entrepreneur, if you had like, especially, I mean, in the early 2000s, if you were an entrepreneur, that just meant you were unemployed, right? And that was basically it. And then it was basically, prior to that, it was, the job market's so good. So you need to, why would you just go into the careers? In the 1980s, you had all these big businesses getting built, and you had, all of these big areas versus I was very much so in this segment where coming out of the 2008 crisis, right? And I was young when that happened, but I had that scenario where the job market wasn't the best, but what that encouraged people to do is it made people realize, oh, I have other opportunities. Like I'm a big believer that I think a lot of there's the stats show it that a third of the millionaires in the US are first generation immigrants to the US. And a lot of times, I think there's many parts to it, but one of the ones is also very much so the access to quality jobs isn't the same for that individual. So entrepreneurship feels like a logical choice. Oh, I can go without a paycheck. I can figure this kind of piece out. And I think I almost feel blessed that I had kind of the ability to jump into it, right, and be interested in it at an early age instead of kind of following the trajectory where I could definitely still see myself with that company, 10 years from now. But I'm much happier where I am now, and I have much more flexibility. And I think that matches what my lifestyle of what I want for the future, if that makes sense.
Well, I think that's a good point. I have to take a break real quick and run a commercial. So I'm just going to put you on mute, and then we'll come back, and I want to talk a little bit about lifestyle.
Hi, I'm Julianne Meyer, the host of Own Your Wellness, and you can watch my show on Mondays and Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific on Achieve TV right here on E360 TV. Remember, there's more to health and wellness than broccoli and burpees.
Yeah, that was a quick one. We're back. So, I think that's an important part, and we've talked about this a little bit earlier, but I think a lot of times entrepreneurs have this idea that they have to build a business that's going to be the next billion-dollar idea, the next billion-dollar business. And maybe, just maybe, you're doing this because you want the freedom and the lifestyle to do what you want. And I know that you've talked about it, and I know you've talked about it with your partner. So
yeah, it's very true. I think especially for my generation, we had the advent of the mobile phone, right? And when that happened, all of a sudden there were all these ideas that came and became possible because the phone was now there, right? It was at scale. People were using it. Like the idea I always say for Uber, it existed. It used to be called Magic Cab in like the 90s, but no one was going to order a cab through a computer when only 20 million people were on the internet, right? It had to be at a scale that now all of a sudden, okay, everyone's got a phone in their pocket. Now Uber can be possible. And I think with that became a lot of younger entrepreneurs becoming and building really, really, really big businesses. And I also don't think they're entrepreneurs we should always idolize, right? Because a lot of times, right, getting there is very, very difficult. And then also too, to get to that point, you're sacrificing absolutely everything you have in your entire life, right? There was a moment I went down the list of the entrepreneurs. If you look at the top like 10 wealthiest people in the world, right? Top 10 entrepreneurs. You look through that list and like I had to get down to like number 7 to find someone who was not divorced, right? And not divorced multiple times. And that's that thing of like not a knock on it. It's that hard thing. If you sacrifice a lot in your business to get to those kind of levels. And I think there's the whole other side of entrepreneurship that a lot of people don't talk about, which is how do you build a stable cash flowing business early on so that you don't need to sacrifice everything and constantly be looking to get the next round of funding to sustain your company? How do you build a stable, smaller business, but it works for your lifestyle really well?
Yeah, that's a great point because I think, like you said, I mean, raising capital is a very, very difficult proposition. It's a numbers game. You're knocking on thousands of doors in order to get it. You're trying to convince people when in reality, I think that, from my observation is that people read these stories, right? Entrepreneurs read these stories. And I experience it with some of the young entrepreneurs I mentor, that they think that it's easy because they see that, this company raised, $500 million. This company raised $200 million. They've got a great idea. They're going to walk in, they're going to propose their idea to investors and everybody's going to start writing checks. And that's just not the way it happens. And, but do you really need to do that? Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of guys out there like yourself, like myself, that just, you want to build a business that you're happy at, that you're mm-hmm. taking care of people, that you've got flexibility, you've got a good schedule, you can manipulate your own schedule when things happen, and you just want a nice lifestyle, and being happy. The stress of trying to raise money, and then when you get that money, the stress
to deliver
investors happy, and deliver on the proposition.
I completely agree. I forget the famous entrepreneur who said it took me 1,000 nights to have an overnight success, but I think it's very, very, very true. Where a lot of times too, we live in the world of social media nowadays, where you only see the highlight reel of everyone's life, and in reality, you realize that one, what did it take to get that highlight reel? Two, is that highlight reel actually true, or are they just kind of lying about it? And sadly, I think nowadays we live in more of a showy kind of world where people are trying to show off for other people. And that's not something that's ever stuck with me. It's not who I feel like I am internally. And I think I see a lot of the toxicity that comes from it. I think Travis Kalanick from Uber, right? You saw a lot of the things that he went through and was not known as he was known as a great entrepreneur, but not taking care of his people. The culture was very toxic, right?
Yeah.
In that environment. And I think now it's that interesting thing of, you got to find what you're prioritizing and then make sure it maps to it, right? So if you look 5 years out, right, how do you build the business that works for you? Right now, I feel really great because I'm privileged. I have my co-founder, Dave. We have another full-time guy down in Baltimore, Cole, who we have great relationships with, right? He's someone who's grown up with the company with us throughout this entire period of time. And we're all now at different, in the early days, we were all at similar stages in life, right? Where we're doing the same thing. We were all in the same kind of stage. And then now it's funny, I moved up to New England. My wife, left her full-time job. So that created a different dynamic than my co-founder, Dave, did down in Baltimore. And then Cole is at a different stage now where he's about to have his first kid, right? So there's that scenario where that's not something that's in my cards, right? That's not what I'm thinking about, but we need the company to work for him there. And he was willing when he took his jump. That was one of his things, is he definitely saw us as having the flexibility that he would want in a 10-year window. And I think I give a lot of people credit who can think that far out and make sure what they're doing now will get there. Because if you actually do want that kind of lifestyle, make sure the company is willing to accompany for that.
Yeah, it's true. We're very much decentralized. We've got people working remotely. We've got people in Michigan. We've got people in Baltimore and New York and down south in North Carolina, South Carolina. And one of the things that they all say all the time is, I'm thankful that I have a job that I can do from wherever I am, because I have the flexibility. As long as I get the work done, and they're 100% right. As long as we get the work done, I don't care where you are. I don't care if you're if you're traveling to England, if you're traveling to your parents' house, or I don't care. You could go to Florida, sit on the beach, and do your job. As long as you get the work done. And I've always been that way. And I think that people value that almost more than money, because
Totally agree with you.
They feel like that they don't have to, when you work remotely. And I know that, there's a lot of discussion about it in the news today and everything since COVID. Yeah. But when you work remotely, you get up in the morning, you're not rushing, you're not jumping in your car, rolling out, sitting in traffic. And what that does for your head, I think, is it makes you more productive. And when you're just staying home, it makes you more productive. It makes you calmer, and what I found it early on, is that when people work from home, they're working more than 8 hours, right? And if they're coming to the office, between the travel time, between the breaks they take, between the this and that, you're not getting a full 8 hours out of them. So I find that people are actually more productive, because even if they know they have to hit a deadline, and again, if you want to do that between 8 and midnight, I don't really care, as long as the deadline is hit and as long as we get the job done and the clients are happy. So I do think that the lifestyle businesses are great for people, for the way they think, the way they produce, the way they act.
I literally could not agree with you more. I see it very much so, where this with COVID, right? One of the blessings is it just accelerated, I think, a trajectory we were already on, right? It makes sense that 15, 20 years ago, you really couldn't work remote because there was not great access to internet at public locations. The computers that we're carrying around, the laptops, were a brick. Even when I started in college, they were a brick, my first laptop, right? Nowadays, thing is 3 pounds. I can bring it with me anywhere, and everywhere has access to the internet. So it's just logical that we are going to move towards a more hybrid workforce. But I think there's companies that are doing it well, and there's companies that aren't doing it well. And I think there's a balancing act, and not saying this is right for every business, but I've always found it interesting where some of my jobs, where I worked a handful of jobs that in my career where, okay, they would give us Friday, every other Friday,